Imagine a man who lost his home, his family, and even his own identity. And yet he came back, not once, not twice, but 10 times he cheated death. Monsters, goddesses, tricks, and betrayals. Who is this mysterious figure who challenged Olympus itself? For more than 3,000 years, this story has lived in every person, even in those who have not read this work. Why? We will reveal it in every line. And in the end, watch artificial intelligence show who Odysseus would be today. Could he be you? Stay with us until the end and find out why the Odyssey is not just a legend but a mirror of your life. Today we will talk about one of the greatest works in the history of mankind. Let's go. Chapter 1. The History of Writing and Basic Facts about the Odysseus. Imagine a world without newspapers, books, or even parchment. Only parties by the sea, enchanting feasts in palace halls, or in sophisticated public forums. It was here, somewhere between the 8th and 7th centuries BC, that the voice of an unfamiliar poet, Homer, was born and began to spread. He did not sit at a table with ink and papyrus. His hand instrument was a deep voice, a lyre, and an incredible memory capable of retaining thousands of lines of poetry in his head. It was in this combination that the Odyssey was born, a grand epic that captured the imagination of generations and has come down to us thousands of years later. The Odyssey was written so long ago that people had only just begun to write on something like paper. This is basically one of the first books in the history of mankind. The most common scholarly hypothesis dates the Odyssey to the 8th century BC, around the time when the ancient Greek polities were just consolidating their independence and needed common myths to consolidate them. The date of 750 to 700 BC is consistent with linguistic and archaeological evidence. The language of the poem already shows signs of archaicism, but does not yet contain elements of classical formulas. Approximately 300 years after the Odyssey was written, Sparta and Athens would start a terrible war. However, the Odyssey will still remain the story that unites them as Greeks. Initially, the Odyssey was transmitted by oral raffia singers, wandering poets who, during public readings, not only recited the text but created it anew. They added epithets, changed small details, and responded to the mood of the audience. Each performance was unique. That is why we still do not know the exact authorship, whether it was one genius or a whole school united under the name Homer. Something similar will happen again in 2,000 years in the form of either personal or collective Shakespeare. The oral tradition lasted for centuries. The meter of the dactylic hexameter, 6 feet with a short and 2 long syllables in each foot, served as a kind of framework for memory. The poet could move freely between formulaic phrases, son of Poseidon seas, cunning tracker, and embed storylines in unison with the rhythm of the lyre. This constant meter was not just a poetic game, but a real mnemonic device that helped to memorize more than 12,000 lines. Odysseus' work is unique, and no one will ever write such a work in our civilization. And there are 2 main reasons for this. 1. The work was written at the turn of the written and non-written ages. 2. The work describes events that took place in about 1200 BC, and writing appeared in Greece only in about 800 BC. That is, this work was passed down from generation to generation of poets for 400 years. They selected, like a sieve, those words and forms of presentation that resonated with the audience. This 400-year-long screening and filtering produced one of the greatest works in human history. That is why its stories remain relevant today. Even now, people who have not even heard of the Odyssey are recreating its plots in TikTok. After all, technologies change, but people remain people. When this work was created, humanity did not yet have a written language. Then there was writing, then book publishing, then printing, then computers, and now artificial intelligence is voicing this text. Everything in terms of technology has changed in 300 years, but the Odyssey remains alive and relevant. It was only in the 7th century BCE that the Phoenician alphabet was introduced in Greece. Although the first Homeric texts have not yet survived, it was then that the epic began to be written down on papyrus and later on parchment. By the time of the Library of Alexandria, 3rd century BCE, Greek scholars such as Philetus of Smyrna and Aristarchus of Samos codified the Iliad and Odyssey, creating the first manuscript traditions. They introduced marks in the margins, obelisks, asterisks, to indicate disputed lines, and formed notes that were later called raphia, the editorial traces of the poet-singers. The most important of the surviving manuscripts is Venetus A, 5th century CE, now kept in the National Library of Venice. This is a parchment codex collection in which the text of the Odyssey is accompanied by numerous comments by Alexandrian philologists. The marks in the margins testify to thousands of years of copying and corrections. Letter forms, interlining, and line breaks are all carefully preserved in a manuscript that has withstood Byzantine upheavals and paleographic reforms. The very history of the creation, transmission, and recording of the Odyssey is a story of how humanity has learned to preserve a great narrative through the ages. We begin with the poet's voice and lyrical rhythm, move on to the first papyri and parchments, and end in Venice in the 5th century AD, where fragile pages with Homeric lines are waiting for us so that we can plunge into the voyage of the cunning hero. And it is thanks to this time tunnel that the poem has become the bridge that the Odyssey stands between us and the antiquity of the archaic ages today, majestic, indestructible, and eternal. Chapter 2. The most interesting facts about the Odyssey. 1. The blind poet and his voice. According to an ancient tradition, Homer was considered blind, and the epic itself began with an appeal to the muse. Tell me, muse, about a cunning man. This blindness is rather a symbolic device that emphasizes that the poet sees the world not with his eyes, but with eternal vision of his imagination. Imagine, at that time, the voice and rhythm were the main instruments, because there were no large-scale manuscripts yet, and the poem could only be heard live, accompanied by a lyre. 12,110 lines is an epic marathon. The standard text of the Odyssey has about 12,110 lines of dactylic hexameter. To recite them all, the poet would need more than 8 hours without a break. In ancient times, the episodes were divided into parts and recited during multi-day celebrations or competitive festivals, so listeners experienced Odysseus' return gradually, as if it were a series that lasted several weeks. 3. The intricate hero with no name. In the original, the hero is hardly ever called by name. Instead of a name, the formula "the one who wandered" or "son of Laertes" is skillfully used. This gave the poet the freedom to emphasize the universality of the journey, not just the story of Odysseus, but of each of us who has ever sought our own path. 4. The Odyssey cycle with multiple beginnings. In some early manuscripts, marked with obelisks in the margins, there were 2 versions of the beginning of the first song, one with a prose prologue, the other with the actual verse lines. This is evidence of an epic oral tradition in which texts were constantly breathing and gaining their final form only in the Library of Alexandria. 5. Venetus A. and the King of Editing. The most important manuscript, Venetus, 5th century CE, contains not only the text but also more than 5,000 notes by Alexandrian philologists who argued over every word. There are obelisks, signs of a doubtful line, and asterisks, signs of the most reliable line. This is the first comprehensive textual criticism in history that preceded the medieval printing era. 6. Are the Sirens, Cyclopes, Scylla, and Charybdis real prototypes? Some scholars suggest that the images of monsters in the Odyssey are metaphors for natural and cultural challenges. Scylla and Charybdis could be 2 bridges in a narrow strait where the bays mixed the currents and created dangerous eddies. And the blind Cyclopes are references to the semi-wild tribes that lived in the caves of Sicily. 7. A language that has survived the ages. The archaic Homeric Greek language differs significantly from the classical language. It retains old forms of words, mostly characteristic of the archaic period. Today, the study of these forms has allowed linguists to recreate the development of the Hellenic language from the Phoenician alphabet to the later classics. 8 secrets of the mnemonic hexameter. The dactylic hexameter is like a wind formula. It is this unbroken rhythm that acts as a lighthouse for the poet. It contains the helium of memory that helped to keep long sequences of formulas and epithets in his head even without writing. 9. The Odyssey as the first travel guide. The poem describes in detail 10 to 12 destinations, from the fertile fields of the Thebes to the fiery caves of Cyclopes. Given that real travel in those days lasted for months, Odysseus became perhaps the first tourist in literature whose adventures inspired listeners to expand their horizons. 10. The most widespread literary plot in the world. With its heroic journey and motifs of the trials of returning home, the Odyssey has become an archetype for numerous cultures, from the Indian Mahabharata to Japanese Zen Buddhist parables. In 2002, Joseph Campbell called it the most powerful and oldest myth template that influences our films, books, and games to this day. And Kubrick's film 2001: A Space Odyssey is a science fiction reinterpretation of Homer's themes of returning home, transformation, and humanity's place in a universe governed by incomprehensible higher powers. These facts demonstrate that the Odyssey is not just a legend about an ancient hero, but a true cultural phenomenon, a text that lived in the voices of listeners, was lost and reborn in manuscripts, survived political cataclysms and scholarly disputes, but is still a guide for travelers and home seekers. Chapter 3. Who among the classics and historical figures mentioned the Odyssey, and what were their reviews? From the very moment the manuscripts of the Odyssey appeared on the ceilings of the Library of Alexandria to the present day, the world's greatest thinkers and artists have constantly turned to Homer's work as an inexhaustible source of inspiration and wisdom. Here are just a few of the most prominent names, and their thoughts on the epic that has united the hearts of millions. Plato. In the Republic, Plato calls Homer's poems dangerous to the soul, because the gods in the Iliad and Odyssey behave too humanly, cheating, quarreling, and scheming against each other. Yet despite this warning criticism, Plato himself invariably refers to Homeric images when he wants to illustrate ideas about friendship, to me with you, as to Odysseus with his companions, about the vocation to travel for the truths of the world, and about human weakness in the face of temptation. Aristotle. In the Poetics, Aristotle analyzes the structure of the epic, noting that one of the strongest examples of unity of action is the Odyssey, where each episode logically follows from the previous one, and the climaxes lead to the final reconciliation of the hero with his home. He also notes that the character of Odysseus' sharp wit and the ability to adapt become a model of interaction with the unknown and improve understanding of the catastrophic but victorious. Cicero. The Roman orator and politician Marcus Tullius Cicero used fragments of the Odyssey in his rhetorical teachings. In his treatise on old age, he mentions that Odysseus' trials can serve as an example of endurance in life for every Roman citizen. And in Brutus, he compares eloquence to speech that drives one mad, like the seduction of Sirens, alluding to Homer's amazing power to enchant the listener. Dante Alighieri. In the Divine Comedy, Dante places Homer in his paradise of poetry alongside classical authors. In the Inferno, Song 4, he calls Homer the Dynamo of poets and explains his own journey through Inferno and Purgatory as more than 1,001 nights of Odysseus' journey. Dante saw in Homer's poem an echo of his own personal journey, and this inspired him to turn the classical epic into a medieval allegory of salvation. Miguel de Cervantes. In his conversations with Sancho, Cervantes' Don Quixote repeatedly mentions the adventures of Odysseus, comparing them to his own nightmare in the battle with the windmills. Although in Don Quixote, Cervantes rather parodies chivalric romances, he pays tribute to the Homeric hero as an archetype of a traveler who overcomes his own illusions and returns to his true self. William Shakespeare. In Shakespeare's best tragedies, Hamlet and King Lear, there are echoes of Homeric stories. Hamlet's To Be or Not to Be is reminiscent of Odysseus' struggle between returning home and a new life in a foreign land. And in King Lear, the motifs of betrayal and forgiveness echo Penelope's testing of her husband's loyalty. Though Shakespeare does not quote Homer directly, his triumph of tragedy undoubtedly draws from the epic's endurance of human performance in the face of the inevitable. John Ronald Tolkien. In The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien recognized that Homer's heroic journey gave him the key to creating his own mythological world. The image of Frodo returning from Morgoth's cave is in many ways reminiscent of Odysseus' journey with the Sirens and wanderings. In his lectures, Tolkien even outlined structural schemes similar to the heroic cycle described by Aristotle in the Odyssey. Ernest Hemingway. Hemingway, known for his economical prose, called his novel The Old Man and the Sea a deliberate reference to Odysseus. The old fisherman Santiago fights a huge marlin, just as Odysseus fights Cyclopes and storms. According to Hemingway, it was my way of writing my Odysseus in 20th century prose, about trials, faith in one's own strength, and a return to humanity. James Joyce. In Joyce's Ulysses, the protagonist, Leopold Bloom, makes an Odyssey-like journey through Dublin in one day, passing through numerous stations of Shakespearean and Homeric stories. Joyce invented a special technique for his novel A Stream of Consciousness, in an effort to show the inner world, as Homer once showed the inner conflict of his hero. Contemporary philologists and cultural studies. Today's scholars are actively working with Vanitas A and digital fragments, using mind maps, text mining, and digital reconstructions of manuscripts. They are studying how variants of the Odyssey have changed in different eras, and they are finding deep allusions to contemporary plots in cinema, games, and postmodern novels. Each of these classics and scholars has reinterpreted the Odyssey in his or her own way, discovering new facets of the work's greatness and universality. The history of their responses forms an invisible chain of generations, From Plato to Joyce, they all recognized our own aspirations, fears, triumphs, and defeats in the Odyssey. It is this wealth of responses that turns the ancient Homeric poem into a living, breathing memory of humanity. Chapter 4. The plot of the Odyssey. The story centers on the cunning king of Ithaca, Odysseus, who returns home after winning the Trojan War. His journey is divided into two conditional layers: the events that took place on the island of Ithaca and a large retrospective on what happened to the hero 10 years after the Trojan War. The Odyssey consists of 24 songs, 24 parts. Parts 1 to 4, Telemachus in search of his father. Song 1, The Fight with the Brazen Men. Place and time. The action begins about 10 years after the fall of Troy on Ithaca, a small island kingdom in western Greece. Who is Telemachus? He is the only son of Odysseus and Penelope, a young man of about 16 or 18 who is already beginning to realize his destiny as heir to the king. The essence of the conflict. Odysseus is being held in an unknown place, so more than 100 suitors, rich but impudent men, have settled in his palace. They drink wine, eat cattle, boldly grab the treasures of the house, and most importantly, they believe that Penelope must immediately choose one of them as her new husband, so that Ithaca will not be left without a ruler. The clash. Telemachus raises his voice against the violation of the peaceful order. He calls on the suitors to leave the courtyard and return the appropriated things. But the suitors mock him and threaten him with swords. The young man realizes that until Odysseus returns, he has no power to tame the insolence. This is the first test of his courage and responsibility. Song 2, Penelope's Lament. Who is Penelope? She is the faithful wife of Odysseus, known for her wisdom. Together with Telemachus, she is the heart and soul of the palace. Why was she surrounded by suitors? In Homer's world, a ruler must have masculine strength, so without Odysseus, it seemed that Ithaca was doomed to be weak. The suitors hoped to take power through marriage. Her trick with weaving. Penelope vowed to complete a bedspread for the Laertes' crypt, her father-in-law's grave, before she married. Every day, she wove the coveted cloths, and in the evening she secretly unwound everything she had managed to do during the day. This went on for 3 years until one of her suitors spied on her secret. This weaving ceremony is not just a time-wasting exercise, but a demonstration of the power of the mind over force and a cunning worthy of the heir to Odysseus. Song 3, Telemachus' Voyage. Why does Telemachus set out on a journey? Athena, the goddess of wisdom and patroness of Odysseus, appeared to him in a dream and encouraged him to act. Go on a journey to find information about your father. Step 1, Pylos and Nestor. Telemachus comes to the old king Nestor in Pylos, a city in southwestern Greece. Nestor was a witness to the Trojan War and tells of the scattered ships of the Greeks after the fall of Troy. He does not give exact news about Odysseus, but sends Telemachus to Sparta. Step to Sparta and Menelaus and Helen. Sparta is ruled by Menelaus, the brother of Agamemnon, one of the Greek leaders in the war, and by Helen, the beautiful woman kidnapped by the Trojans whose story sparked the entire conflict. Menelaus and Helen receive Telemachus with honors. They tell him that they themselves have been wandering for a long time. Helen saw Odysseus on one of the coasts or heard about his ingenuity. Although there are no exact coordinates, Telemachus learns that there is danger, but there is hope. His father is alive. Song 4. Returning with renewed vigor. Telemachus returns to Ithaca with a sense of purpose and hope. His travels have taught him determination and diplomacy. He has observed how courageous warriors and wise rulers adapted to uncertainty, how they preserved their dignity and honor. Now the young man knows that he is not alone in his fight against the arrogant, and that the story of his father's life can be continued through him. Athena continues to watch him and whispers, "It's a long time to wait, but the time of your desire will surely come." These first 4 books of the Odyssey are not just a prologue to Odysseus' adventures, but a separate story of Telemachus growing up. He goes on a quest from a powerless heir to an almost equal participant in his father's saga, and it is this parallel line that makes the poem complete, as the hero's journey unfolds in 2 generations at once. The story of Odysseus begins with him sailing away from the shores of destroyed Troy. Homer described the 10-year-long Trojan War itself in another epic poem called the Iliad. His task is to return home, to the island of Ithaca, where his wife Penelope and son Telemachus have been waiting for him for 10 years. However, not everything is so simple. Odysseus had many adventures on his way back home. If the Trojan War lasted 10 years, then it took him 10 years to get back. The battle with the Kikons is the first adventures of Odysseus after the end of the Trojan War, described in Homer's Odyssey. This event took place when Odysseus and his warriors left the destroyed Troy and went home to Ithaca. After a 10-year siege of Troy, Odysseus' warriors were exhausted. Although they had gained considerable booty in Troy, the journey home required additional resources, food, water, and materials to repair their ships. The attack on Ismar was an opportunity to replenish the supplies needed to survive the long sea voyage. In ancient Greek society, the plundering of enemy cities after a war victory was considered an acceptable practice. It not only provided material goods, but also brought fame and fortune, which were important to heroes such as Odysseus. Attacking the Kikons was in line with this tradition. It was a way to strengthen one's status and maintain the morale of the warriors. Odysseus was not just a traveler in a hurry to get home. As the hero of the epic, he sought feats that would glorify his name. Capturing Ismar could have been another achievement that would have added to his fame after the victory in Troy. The attack on Ismar was initially successful. Odysseus and his warriors captured the city, killed the men, and took the women and property as booty. However, they lingered to celebrate the victory, which was a fatal mistake. The Kikons, who lived further from the coast, gathered their forces and unexpectedly counterattacked. This resistance was stronger than the Greeks expected and led to significant losses among Odysseus' soldiers. Only a few managed to escape and reach the ships. This failure shows that Odysseus underestimated the enemy and did not conduct proper reconnaissance, making his plan a failure. This event emphasizes the complexity of Odysseus' character, a clever strategist, but sometimes an overconfident leader. After fleeing from the Ciconians, where his men suffered losses, he tried to return to Ithaca. But a strong wind blew his ships southward, and after 9 days of sailing, they docked in the land of the Lotus, which Homer associates with the territory of modern Libya. Odysseus did not know about the Lotus Islands in advance and did not look for them. His fleet simply ended up there because of weather conditions. As in other adventures, Odysseus landed in an unfamiliar land to explore it. He sent 3 scouts to find out who lived there, unaware of the danger of the lotus fruit. The peculiarity of the lotus phages was that they ate lotus fruit. The sweet lotus fruit had a terrible property. The one who tasted it forever forgot about his homeland. The 3 scouts of Odysseus were fed with these fruits by the lotus phages. After eating the fruit, Odysseus' companions forgot why they were sent. Without waiting for them to return, Odysseus and a small group went in search. They found the missing men, brought them back to the ship by force, tied them up, and went back out to sea. The encounter with the lotus frogs did not bring Odysseus material benefits, such as food or treasure, but was an important experience. Odysseus realized that unknown lands can hide not only physical, but also psychological threats. The lotus fruit made people forget about their goal of returning home, which could have derailed the entire journey. Thanks to his determination, Odysseus rescued the scouts who had tasted the lotus. He returned them to the ship by force, which showed his leadership skills and ability to protect his men. In this way, Odysseus learned a valuable lesson about caution and the need to keep the spirit of his soldiers alive. Odysseus' flotilla continued on and sailed to an island where many goats grazed. The Greeks had a hearty meal of their meat. However, it turned out that it was not just an island and not just goats. It was an island of Cyclopes. Cyclopes are one-headed cattle giants, children of Poseidon, who live in caves on a remote island. They don't know cities or maritime laws. They hunt nomadically and don't even build boats. Odysseus went into the depths of the island in search of fresh water and food. He and his 12 companions found a cave filled with cheese and young wine that the Cyclopes had left there for storage. It was the cave of the Cyclops Polyphemus. And Polyphemus was the son of Poseidon himself. When the Cyclops returned from the field, he blocked the entrance with a large stone and locked Odysseus and his soldiers inside. Odysseus and his comrades were trapped with no chance of a direct fight. Polyphemus began to eat Odysseus' soldiers. He ate 2 soldiers during the first night and 2 more in the morning for breakfast. Then, before Odysseus realized his escape, he ate 2 more. That is, a total of 6 men were eaten. Odysseus managed to trick the Cyclops into drinking strong wine, and he fell asleep. While the Cyclops was sleeping, Odysseus and a few of his comrades sharpened a stake in the fire and blinded the Cyclops' eye. In the morning, the Cyclops pushed aside the stone that blocked the exit from the cave in order to lead the sheep to pasture. The rest of Odysseus' team crawled out of the cave with the sheep, hiding under the bellies of the sheep. The blind Cyclops could not see this. Another trick of Odysseus was that the Cyclops was quite stupid, and when the Cyclops asked Odysseus' name from the very beginning, Odysseus introduced himself as nobody. Thus, when the other Cyclopes asked who blinded him, the Cyclops Polyphemus answered that no one did. As a result of this adventure with the Cyclopes, Odysseus received food and wine to continue his journey. On the downside, the god Poseidon became his personal enemy. The next episode is The Visit to Aeolus. The essence of this episode is to show that even an alliance with a god does not guarantee success if people are unrestrained in their greed. Aeolus is the lord of the winds and the son of the goddess Anoia and Poseidon, who lives on the island of Aeolus, surrounded by an invisible wall of metal rocks and an always cloudless sky. His name literally means the one who moves quickly, and Aeolus possesses all the winds, from a gentle breeze to a devastating storm. Why was Odysseus interested in contacting Aeolus? Polyphemus' blindness angered his father, the god of the seas. Poseidon raised violent storms and changed the winds. Even when Odysseus was directing the ships to Ithaca, the weather prevented them from staying on course. Without Aeolus' intervention, a direct voyage would have been deadly and even impossible. Odysseus and Aeolus met in the following way. When Aeolus noticed the cunning guest sailing hopelessly on his ship, he greeted him with the greatest honors. He served a solid feast, gave him clean clothes, and presented Odysseus with a sack that kept all the wind away. The idea was that Odysseus could release only the tailwinds at any time and keep the rest locked up, and then the ship would take him home on its own. Aeolus' interest in this cooperation is quite simple. He is proud of his power over the elements and is happy to demonstrate it as if he were giving a magic tool to anyone he considers worthy and hospitable. But when on the last night the sailors, on the instinct of easy enrichment, they thought there was gold in the sack, crept up to the sack and opened it, all the whirlwinds covered the raft, and Odysseus was trapped in the storm again. Aeolus, hearing the ships rumble back, decided that the gods had begun to dishonor his generosity and refused to help him a second time, expelling the cunning guest from his island. Thus, a purely human conflict of trust arose between them. The gift of powerful power turned out to be useless due to disobedience and greed, and the pride of the wind god could not stand the insult. The next episode. Laestrigons, giant cannibals. The Laestrigons are a clan of big-headed, powerful giants, descendants of Laestrigon, who live in a rocky bay. After an unsuccessful escape from Aeolus, their ships were carried to the next shore. It was the only land on the way. Odysseus came to a large harbor well protected from the surf, lined with steep cliffs. The local tribes, giant cattlemen, herding flocks of sheep, seemed peaceful. They were fishing on sharp stone slopes and inviting guests to a feast. While Odysseus's men were still enjoying fresh water from the spring, Queen Theleno of Laestrigon offered to take them to her father, King Antipas, who lived in a rocky palace above the harbor. None of the Greeks expected a trick. After all, hospitality was considered sacred among ancient peoples. While Odysseus was talking to Antipas and exchanging greetings, the warrior giants suddenly rose from the rocks. They threw colossal rare boulders at the ships, crushing the masts and bottoms of the foreign vessels. The Greek ships, pinned to the rocks of the bay, had nowhere to escape all but one, which stood apart. While the stones were falling on the ships, the giants pelted the soldiers with spears and stones, drove them into the water, and ate them in the port. In total, they destroyed about 11 ships, and almost all of Odysseus' army was killed. Only Odysseus' ship, which was at the exit of the bay, was spared by years of rocks and boulders. It was able to disappear in the darkness of the night when the giants returned to the feast. Odysseus raised his sails, sailed into open water, and never saw those shores again. The essence of the conflict with the Laestrigons is not a political or religious discord, but purely the intervention of greed and power. The guests were treated as prey, and the feast of hospitality turned into a bloody trap. Odysseus and his group had the only chance to escape in time on their only ship, and this experience once again conquered their will to survive. None of them could any longer allow recklessness to guide their journey home. The next was a test of hedonism. The sorceress Circe. Circe is a powerful sorceress on the island of Aegea, the daughter of the sun Helios, on whose island Odysseus stayed for a year. Circe is a sorceress who lived on the remote island of Aegea. She had already encountered rude strangers, so she used a magic drink to make the newcomers harmless. This time she decided to turn them into pigs. In the form of pigs, they remained alive, but free of threat. For the Greeks, the pig is a symbol of insatiability and foolishness. It's ironic that some of the sailors, drunk and confused, behaved just like pigs. It simply reflected their state. Hermes had warned Odysseus in advance. To avoid transformation, he had to take a magic plant, a moth, which would neutralize her spell. Odysseus proved to be unbreakable. He did not succumb to the potion, threatened her with a sword, and made her swear that she would not harm him. This impressed Circe. For the first time, someone resisted her power. And she, like other sorceresses in Greek mythology, immediately fell in love with someone who was her equal in power. From then on, he became her chosen one, and she became a humble mistress. Having become an ally of Odysseus, Circe told him how to pass between Scylla and Charybdis, warned him about the Sirens, and said that he had to go down to the underworld to talk to Tiresias. At the same time, on the island of Circe, Odysseus was tested by hedonism. There is also an additional symbolism in the fact that his crew was turned into pigs. Some 2,000 years later, Dante would also describe sinful hedonism in his Divine Comedy as one of the 7 deadly sins, and in 1995, David Fincher would direct the cult movie Seven starring Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman, and Kevin Spacey. Interestingly, Brad Pitt also starred in the movie Troy, based on another epic work by Homer, the Iliad. Whatever one may say, even Brad Pitt's life is to some extent influenced by Homer, who lived almost 3,000 years ago. As for Dante and his great work, one of the next videos on our channel will be dedicated to him. So don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. It will be interesting. Let's get back to Odysseus and Circe. From the point of view of symbolism, Circe is a temptation for which you can stop, but not succumb to it completely, not betray a great goal for the sake of a pleasant present. Odysseus is the one who experienced temptation but returned to the goal, albeit with a delay. He is the character who made the wrong decision in the here and now, which is the right one from the point of view of a big global goal. And this is an extremely strong semantic, logical, and philosophical technique that is relevant in the private life of each of us and within the framework of modern applied psychology. And so Odysseus had a sexual relationship with Circe, even though his wife Penelope, whom he loved and who had been waiting for him for 20 years, was waiting for him at home. His sexual interaction with Circe is openly mentioned in Homer's Odyssey. He became her lover and spent a whole year with her, living in the role of her husband. Homer describes this without judgment. Circe invited him to bed after he made her swear not to harm him, and he agreed. In ancient Greek society, this was not interpreted as adultery in the modern sense. What do you think about this? If girls are listening to this, would you forgive Odysseus? In fact, he had no other choice. If he didn't have sex with Circe, he would never have gotten to his beloved wife Penelope. From the point of view of classical Greek mythology, the interpretation is as follows. The hero had the right to the women he met on his travels, as long as it did not interfere with his main goal of returning home. Penelope remained a model of loyalty, which was rare, and against the background of her behavior, Odysseus' actions seemed contrasting. But for the ancient Greeks, betrayal was more about honor than sexual fidelity. The main thing is, did he forget Penelope? No. He wanted to come back and was always thinking about her. Next episode, Descent into the Underworld of Hades. Odysseus's descent into the underworld is one of the darkest and most mystical episodes of the poem. It symbolizes the hero's passage through death, knowledge, and fear necessary for his return home. Here's what happens and why. Circe, the enchantress, with whom he spent a year. After he asked her for permission to continue his journey home, she said, "You will not be able to return to Ithaca unless you descend into the realm of the dead and receive a prophecy from Tiresias, the blind prophet." She also told him how to get there and what ritual to perform. Circe had already turned the pigs back into humans when she realized that Odysseus was not an ordinary traveler, but a hero sent by the gods. Hermes helped him by giving him a potion that made him resistant to magic. After that, she became an ally and helped them. Circe said that the underworld is located at the edge of Oceanus, in a dark place where the sun never rises. There was a cave with an entrance to Hades, the realm of the dead. The ritual before entering the underworld looked as follows. He dug a pit and made a sacrifice, poured honey, milk, wine, and water, and then sacrificed a black ram and a ewe, and their blood attracted the souls of the dead. Odysseus held a sword so that none of the dead would approach the blood until Tiresias arrived. Already in the underworld, Odysseus encountered the soul of Elpenor, one of Odysseus's companions who fell from the roof and died before their departure from Circe's island. No one noticed his death. He asks Odysseus to bury his body, and Odysseus promises to do so. Tiresias is a blind prophet. When Odysseus met him, Tiresias drank from the sacrificial pit and gave his prophecy. He told Odysseus, 1. You will reach Ithaca, but with heavy losses. 2. Don't touch the cows of the god Helios, or you'll all perish. 3. When you return, another journey awaits you. You must appease Poseidon. 4. Your death will come peacefully, in old age, from the sea. After this, Odysseus meets with Antiglia, the soul of his mother. He sees her soul, but learns that she died of grief, not waiting for his return. This is an extremely emotional scene. He wants to embrace her, but she is a shadow and has no body. Odysseus also meets the souls of the dead heroes of the Trojan War: Agamemnon, Achilles, Ajax. Achilles says, better to be a servant on earth than a king in the realm of the dead. Ajax remains silent. He is still angry at Odysseus for losing the contest over Achilles' armor. Agamemnon tells Odysseus a horrifying story of his death, and this is one of the darkest scenes in the Odyssey. His monologue serves several functions at once: a warning, a contrast to Odysseus' fate, and reflections on betrayal. Agamemnon was the king of Mycenae, the supreme commander of the Greek army in the Trojan War. But when he returned home after 10 years of war, he was killed by his wife Clytemnestra and her lover Aegisthus. It was a double betrayal. His wife betrayed him as a man, the betrayal of a guest towards the host who returned from war. After such a story of his death, Agamemnon said the following to Odysseus. 1. About the betrayal of his wife. The most terrifying thing is to die at the hands of a woman you trust. She called me like in a dream and then stabbed me. 2. About treachery. I was killed while sitting at the festive table, unsuspecting. Me and my warriors unarmed. 3. Warning to Odysseus. Do not trust a woman completely. Do not tell her everything, even if she is faithful. Do not announce your return immediately. 4. Praise for Penelope. Happy are you, Odysseus, for your wife is virtuous. She remembers you. Her fame has reached the heavens. The symbolism of this episode lies in the following. Agamemnon is a mirror for Odysseus, 2 heroes, both returning home. One to his doom, the other to his faithful wife. The motif of domestic danger. The Greeks feared not only wars but also that they might be betrayed at home. Contrast with Penelope, her loyalty is further emphasized against the backdrop of Clytemnestra's crime. This plot is one of the oldest stories about a man who returns home and finds betrayal. It became the basis for Aeschylus's tragedy Agamemnon and inspired countless later literary plots. In the realm of the dead, Odysseus met other souls, heroes, sinners, mothers, kings. This is a gallery of shadows that represent the essence of human existence and remind us, life is short, glory is fleeting. What did Odysseus receive in the underworld? He received a prophecy from Tiresias, what, when, and how to do it in order to return home. Warnings about dangers, Sirens, Scylla and Charybdis, Helios' cattle. Psychological growth. After meeting with his mother, comrades, and great dead, he returns mature, changed. The descent into Hades is a rite of initiation. The hero confronts death, weakness, and loss, but returns with a new understanding of himself, fate, and the journey. This stage is a turning point in the Odyssey, after which he is no longer the naive captain who once ventured into islands he should not have. The trials of the Sirens, as well as Scylla and Charybdis. This fragment comes from Book 12 of the Odyssey, one of the most dramatic and symbolic parts of the poem. It contains 3 key trials at sea: the Sirens, Scylla, and Charybdis, as well as the island of the sun god Helios, which becomes fatal for crew. Sirens are magical creatures, often depicted as half-women, half-birds, or as sea nymphs, who lure sailors with their singing, causing them to steer their ships towards the rocks, where they perish. Circe warned Odysseus. The sirens sing so enchantingly that no one can resist. If you listen, you will perish, but you can survive them. Odysseus orders all the rowers to plug their ears with wax so they won't hear the song. He himself asks to be tied to the mast and not to be untied, no matter what he shouts. The sirens truly sing in such a way that Odysseus begs them to let him go. But the crew does not respond to his cries, and he survives. They pass the cliffs and leave the sirens behind. After this, Odysseus passes the trial of Scylla and Charybdis. Scylla is a 6-headed monster that sits in a cave on a cliff and leaps out to devour 6 sailors at once. Charybdis is a whirlpool that 3 times a day sucks in the sea, and spits it back out, dragging ships into the abyss. To pass this trial, Circe advised Odysseus the following tactic: don't try to go in the middle, avoid Charybdis, because if you get caught in it, you'll lose everything. It's better to fall into Scylla. It's better to lose a few men on Scylla's side than all of them in the whirlpool of Charybdis. Better to lose a part than everything. This is one of the darkest and most philosophical moments. Odysseus heeds Circe's advice and chooses to sail closer to Scylla, keeping the plan from his men so they wouldn't panic. Scylla leaps out of her cave and devours 6 sailors. Their screams are the tragic lines of the Odyssey. In modern language, the phrase "between Scylla and Charybdis" means a choice between 2 dangers, or the lesser of 2 evils. Episode on the island of Helios, the god of the sun. After the trials with the Sirens, Scylla and Charybdis, Circe warned Odysseus that they would find themselves in a calm, and from there they would not be moved by the wind for 6 days and nights. And so it happened. The wind died down, and the ship was stranded near the shores of Thrinacia. No one could sail further or turn back. Circe also warned, "Don't touch the cows. This is the final test of your loyalty. If you dare to harm or kill them, the sun god will demand harsh retribution." After all the supplies were exhausted during the month without wind, Odysseus ordered the sailors to conserve provisions and not to touch the sacred cows of Helios. He himself approached the top of a hill or a small cave to communicate with the gods, offer them sacrifices, and ask for wind. At the same time, he spent 2 days there, offering prayers to Zeus, Poseidon, and Helios. Days passed. The wind did not blow, and neither Odysseus nor his voice could be heard. Rumors began to spread among the sailors that Odysseus had died. They only saw the sacred bulls, whose carcasses tempted their hungry eyes. Despair and hunger drove them to disobedience. Despite the strict warning, in the absence of supervision, they slaughtered a few cows, thinking they had done it secretly. As soon as they started roasting the animals over the fire, the wrath of Helios appeared, followed by the punishment of Zeus. And Odysseus, hearing the thunder of lightning, descended to the camp, but he saw only soot and ruins, and he was left alone from the crew. Helios, offended by the violation of his own herd, turned to Zeus with a plea for retribution. Zeus unleashed a deadly lightning bolt and punished the culprits. Odysseus grabs a mast and a few covered wooden planks. That's all that remains of his ship. On this makeshift raft, which he built from the wreckage, the hero set sail at night, hoping to find at least the island of Ogygia or help from the goddess Calypso. What did Odysseus gain from this adventure? 1. A bitter lesson about the consequences of breaking an oath. Even the strongest wife fears hunger, but the hero must stand by his word. 2. Confirmation of one's status as chosen by the gods. He survived, although everyone else perished, because his fate is to return home. 3. The revelation of the final stage of the journey. Now before him, only a solitary battle with the elements, and perhaps salvation from Calypso. This episode is the culmination of many trials. It shows that a true return home requires not only courage and cunning, but also fidelity to promises, even when it seems like the whole world is against you. Another trial of temptation. Now Odysseus was tested not only by hedonism, but also by immortality. Odysseus with Calypso. 9 days later, he found himself near the island of Ogygia, the dwelling place of the nymph Calypso, covered with meadows of flowers and grasses. Calypso lived there in a huge cave, overgrown with poplars, cypresses, and wild vines. In Greek mythology, nymphs are nature spirits, immortal female beings who inhabit forests, mountains, rivers, or caves. They are closer to the gods than humans, but they are not among the 12 Olympian gods. Nymphs can be born as daughters of a titan or a god. In the case of Calypso, her father is Atlas, or they can embody local nature sanctuaries. They are eternal, beautiful, and possess magical abilities, but their rank is lower than that of the main gods of Olympus. Seeing the cunning hero who washed up on her shores after the storm, she fell in love. She fell in love with his strong masculine physique, human bravery, and strength. The nymphs valued eternity, and she promised Odysseus immortality, if only he would stay with her forever. Odysseus's interest lay in the fact that after the storm and the destruction of his raft, he ended up with her exhausted and wounded. In the hospitable surroundings, he could regain his strength. In Homer, it is customary to respect the patroness of the island. Refusal would mean disrespect to the goddess and a violation of the sacred right of hospitality. He took advantage of the comfort to contemplate his path and gather information on when and how to return home. Odysseus remained on the island of Ogygia in the embrace of Calypso for 7 years, before the thunderous gods, by Zeus's command, delivered by Hermes, forced her to let the hero return to the sea. During this time, Calypso gave birth to twins, Nausithous and Nausinous, from Odysseus. Learning that the supreme gods allowed him to continue his journey, Odysseus tied up the raft, bid farewell to the hospitable nymph, and sailed home. But the hero's light raft was accidentally spotted by his nemesis, the god Poseidon, who was riding across the sea in his winged chariot. Directing a massive wave at the raft, Poseidon washed Odysseus overboard. Odysseus barely surfaced and climbed back onto the raft. Next to him, the merciful goddess Leucothea descended from the sky in the form of a diving bird. In her beak, she held a marvelous veil that had the power to save those who wrapped themselves in it from perishing in the ocean's depths. Poseidon shook Odysseus's raft with a second wave of terrifying height. Thinking that this time the hero would not survive, Poseidon returned to his underwater palace. However, Leucothea's veil did not let Odysseus drown. Odysseus on the island of the Phaeacians. After 2 days, completely exhausted from battling the water element, he reached the island of Drepanum, where the Phaeacians lived. Here, on the shore, Odysseus fell into a deep sleep. The next morning, Nausicaa, the daughter of the king and queen of the Phaeacians, Alcinous and Arete, came with her maidservants to the stream to wash clothes. After their work, the girls started playing ball and shouted loudly when it fell into the water. This cry woke Odysseus. Covering his nakedness with branches, he approached the girls and with a masterful speech won Nausicaa's sympathy. The princess took him to the palace, to her father and mother. King Alcinous listened to Odysseus's tale of travels, gifted him, and ordered him to be taken by sea to Ithaca. Being already near his native island, Odysseus fell asleep again. The Phaeacians, who were with him, did not wake the sailor but carried him asleep to the shore, placing the gifts of Alcinous beside him. When the Phaeacians were returning to their harbor on the ship, Poseidon, angered by their help to Odysseus, struck the vessel with his palm and turned it, along with the crew, into stone. He threatened Alcinous that he would destroy all the ports on the island of the Phaeacians, burying them under the rubble of a great mountain. The moral of this part of the Odyssey lies in the combination of genuine human hospitality with caution and respect for the divine order. Generosity and kindness are rewarded, but indiscriminate help can anger forces that have their own rules of the game. Specifically, Nausicaa and the Phaeacians demonstrate selfless kindness. They provide shelter to the weary stranger, shower him with gifts, and send him home. Homer shows how genuine care for those in need is rewarded, despite the fact that Odysseus was a stranger and might not have inspired trust. However, there is a caveat here. The help of the Phaeacians, too powerful and swift, provoked Poseidon's wrath. By disrupting the balance of divine power, gathering an entire fleet to directly deliver the hero home, they inadvertently intruded into the domain of the sea god. This is a lesson. Even good deeds must be done with caution and respect for other forces and boundaries. When Odysseus fell asleep before Ithaca, the Phaeacians, not wanting to wake him, quietly carried him to the shore. This was an act of tenderness, but at the same time, yet another postponement of fate. The hero could not finally take the reins of destiny into his own hands because he continued to rely on the kindness of others. Poseidon's punishment, turning the Phaeacian ship into stone and threatening the destruction of their ports, highlights that the gods demand not only human kindness, but also restraint in their sphere of influence. This is a story about the limits of altruism and how even the best intentions can lead to disaster if higher laws of the universe are not taken into account. The return of Odysseus to Ithaca. Waking up on Ithaca, Odysseus walked away from the seashore and encountered the goddess Athena, who had taken the form of a shepherd. Not knowing that he was in the presence of Athena, Odysseus told her a fabricated story, claiming to be a Cretan who had fled his homeland due to murder and had accidentally arrived in Ithaca. Athena laughed and revealed her true identity to Odysseus. The goddess helped the hero hide King Alcinous's gifts in a cave and made him unrecognizable. Odysseus's skin became wrinkled, his head bald, and his clothes turned into ragged tatters. On Ithaca, everyone thought that Odysseus had died, and 112 noble young men from this and neighboring islands shamelessly began to court his wife Penelope. By marrying her, each of these young men hoped to gain the local royal throne. The suitors hated Telemachus and planned to kill him when he returned from Sparta. The suitors, Homer recounts, asked Penelope to choose one of them as her husband. At first, she categorically refused, saying that her husband Odysseus was undoubtedly still alive. However, The agreement was such that Penelope would make her choice after she wove a shroud for the old father of Odysseus, Laertes. For 3 years, Penelope sat over the shroud. Remaining faithful to her husband and deceiving the suitors, she wove during the day and secretly unraveled all the work done during the day and the evening. Meanwhile, the suitors feasted in Odysseus's palace for those 3 years. They drank his wine, slaughtered and ate his cattle, and plundered his property. At that time, Telemachus returned to Ithaca from Sparta. The goddess Athena inspired him with the thought of hurrying home. She also led Telemachus to Eumaeus' hut, where his father was. During their meeting, Athena temporarily restored Odysseus to his former appearance, and father and son recognized each other. Odysseus decided to act against the suitors with a surprise, so he did not allow Telemachus to tell anyone who he was. Telemachus was not to reveal this secret even to his mother, Penelope. Once again taking on the guise of a beggar, Odysseus went to his home, where the suitors were feasting. No one recognized him along the way. In the palace courtyard, Odysseus saw his faithful hunting dog, Argus, once strong and swift, now dying of old age on a pile of dung. Recognizing his master, Argus wagged his tail, moved his muzzle, and died. Eumaeus led Odysseus to the hall where the suitors were feasting. Continuing to pretend to be a beggar, Odysseus walked along the table, asking the suitors for scraps. But these greedy and shameless young men rudely drove him away. The most shameless of the suitors, Antinous, threw a stool at Odysseus, which he had previously rested his feet on. The local beggar, Iris, fearing that the stranger would now compete with him for scraps of food, began to drive Odysseus out of the hall. Trying to present himself as a brave man, Iris challenged Odysseus to a fistfight. Odysseus threw off the upper part of his rags and approached Iris. Seeing Odysseus's powerful musculature, the beggar was terribly frightened. Odysseus knocked him to the ground with the first punch. Laughing at the fight, the suitors continued their banquet, and in the evening, they went home. When no one was left in the hall, Odysseus ordered Telemachus to take down and hide the suitors' weapons that were hanging on the walls in the storeroom. Meanwhile, Penelope, having heard about the stranger, called him to her and asked if he had heard any news about her missing husband, Odysseus. Odysseus did not reveal himself to her yet, saying only that her husband was alive and would return soon. Penelope instructed the old nurse of Odysseus, Euryclea, to wash the traveler's feet. After bringing water, Euryclea suddenly saw the familiar old scar on Odysseus's thigh. She gasped in joy and surprise, but Odysseus put his finger to his lips, indicating that it was not yet time to reveal his presence to Penelope. The next day, the suitors gathered again to feast and loudly demanded that Penelope make her final choice and name one of them as her husband. Penelope announced that she would marry the one who could string the sturdy bow of her former husband Odysseus and shoot an arrow through the holes in 12 axes. Several suitors tried to string the bow, but they couldn't. After that, Odysseus took the bow. The arrow he shot flew through the holes of 12 axes. Odysseus stood with a bow and arrows at the entrance to the hall, and Telemachus stood beside him, holding a spear and a sword. Having killed Antinous with the next shot, Odysseus revealed his true identity to the suitors. The suitors rushed to the walls for heavy weapons, but saw that there were none there. Most of them, however, had swords. Drawing their swords, the suitors lunged at Odysseus, but with extraordinary precision, he struck them down with his arrows. The battle began. On Odysseus's side stood several of his loyal old servants and his son Telemachus. One by one, Odysseus killed all the suitors. Several palace maidservants were also killed, who had been promiscuous with the suitors and had helped them plunder Odysseus's possessions. The revelation of Odysseus's true identity to Penelope occurs in the XCI book of the Odyssey and consists of several key moments. After Odysseus, accompanied by Telemachus and a few loyal servants, dealt with the suitors, he still remained in the guise of a beggar that Athena had cast upon him earlier so he could enter the palace unnoticed. But before meeting Penelope, the goddess restored his true appearance. Before Penelope stands her husband, tall, strong, dressed in pure royal robes and adorned with golden ornaments. When the beggar disappeared and Odysseus appeared in his place, Penelope felt both relief and doubt at the same time. After 20 years of deception and trickery, she is afraid of being too lighthearted. What if this is just another joke from the gods? She decides to test him. Penelope coolly asks, "Tell me, my husband, how did it happen that you left that bed? Was it treachery or substitution?" Odysseus, comforted by his wife's trust, describes each part of the bed in detail and with emotion. the root of the olive tree, covered with skins, like the heart of the home. Penelope, hearing this, recognizes not only her original interior, but also her husband's deep care, and, convinced that it is truly him, falls on his neck, cries, and finally surrenders into his embrace. This moment marks the ultimate triumph of Odysseus, not only over his enemies, but also over the doubts of his closest ones. After this, the servants restore the palace after the battle with the suitors, adorn it with fresh fabrics, light the lamps, and prepare a grand feast in honor of the king's return. Telemachus sits again at the same table with his father and mother. Their family is whole again. After learning about the massacre, the relatives of the slain grooms gather near the palace, demanding a fair trial or blood revenge. This is what Homer's Odyssey was like, which was described about 3,000 years ago. After all, epic ancient works are characterized by the fact that only technologies change, while people remain people, and the plots of the Odyssey remain relevant forever. Here are examples of AI generation of what each of our Odysseys might look like in the 21st century. 1. The Cyclopes is a toxic boss. Situation: you start a new job at a small but promising company. At first, everything seems great. The boss promised career growth and a generous salary. Conflict: over time, you realize that the boss monopolizes the department's resources, stifles initiative, and swallows all your success, from vacations to bonuses. Solution: sunflower. Instead of open confrontation, you gather evidence like Odysseus and his team with a staff spear, carefully document violations of labor laws, and seek a secret exit, a lawyer or a senior HR. Lesson: don't fall for shiny promises and defend your dignity with wisdom and cunning, not brute force. 2. Sirens is attractive but empty trends of social media. Situation: you create content, a blog, podcast, or channel, and suddenly see one of your colleagues making a viral video in 24 hours. Temptation: to succumb to the lure of chasing instant likes, reposting memes, jumping on every trend, inflating scandals. Odyssean maneuver: just as the hero ties himself to the mast, you preset filters within the platform, an anxiety topic blocker, a social media timer, and allow yourself only one siren song per week. If you stray off course, the cost of the audience will deter you. Lesson: the value of long-term audience trust is much more important than temporary hype. 3. Scylla and Charybdis as the balance between work and personal life. Situation: you are simultaneously working on a big project, Scylla, and taking care of a close relative or raising a child, Charybdis. Both monsters paralyze you. If you get too caught up in the project, your relatives will fall into the trap. You'll miss an important family event. If you devote yourself entirely to the family, your work risks going down the drain. Odysseus's trick: you choose the lesser of two evils and sacrifice a few hours of additional tasks, losing 6 sailors, but you keep the key deadline. At the same time, you negotiate a flexible schedule with your colleagues and arrange for family help and caregiving. Lesson: sometimes you have to make a painful choice, but it's better to sacrifice the less important to save the main thing. 4. Island of Resorts versus Dream Startup. Siren Circe, you are offered a high-paying corporate position with all the feasts, a 5-star hotel, a daily fitness club, business leisure, and a VIP club of millionaire colleagues. Risk: after 2 years in this golden cage, you will forget your true dream to launch your own startup, which has already taken years of research. Heroic choice: you agree to a year or 2 of hedonism, gaining resources, skills, and contacts, but you set a clear deadline, and as soon as it passes, you step out of your comfort zone to return to your mission. Lesson: comfortable conditions can transform us into loyal corporate clients if we don't set boundaries and forget the bigger goal. Or you cannot sell yourself and just accumulate resources. Use the system to your own advantage, as Odysseus did. 5. Flirtatious nymph and fidelity in relationships. Temptress nymph: you meet an exciting person at a business event, and an intense flirtation ignites immediately, leading to an adventurous night. Risk: you are happy here and now, but at home, there is a partner with whom you have a long-term project, family, children, shared business. Heroic choice: you allow yourself one odyssey of passion, but immediately set honest boundaries. For example, discuss it with your partner, take a pause in family life, and return home to avoid shaking the foundation of the relationship. Lesson: even if we are enchanted by an attractive stranger, true loyalty is measured not by the absence of temptations, but by the ability to return to our main duty. In all 5 examples, the temptation of islands of comfort or enchanting adventures provides short-term satisfaction, but the modern hero does not forget Odysseus's goal: to return home to their project, family, dream, and wisely chooses when to stop and when to move on. Which of Odysseus' trials impressed you the most? Which of Odysseus' trials impressed you the most? Write in the comments. Subscribe and see you in the next videos.